Gosh, well, I'm thankful, Patrick. That was so beautifully said. I almost feel like I have nothing more to say. Not quite that, but first, I do want to say that I'm so grateful to be here, and thank you all for being here. Um, After 10 years of writing, in 2001, I published what we now refer to around my office as the first wine Bible. And I'm not sure exactly how many wines it took to write the first wine Bible. But now, after this week, after 4 years, out has come the second wine Bible. So I'm twice as fast. I think that's perhaps a bit of an accomplishment. And I know that for this second wine Bible, we tasted close to 10,000 wines. Some woman has to do it, right? So I want to talk tonight about 3 ideas that I think are worthy of your thinking. But first, before I talk about those ideas, I have to say that the we in the we is about this. This time around, with the second wine Bible, I knew how big the elephant was, in a sense. The first time around, part of the whole project was to just understand the entire world of wine and wrap one's arms around it. This time I knew that it would be a very, very big project, even though I also knew that I was going to add China, Japan, Slovenia, Mexico, Canada greatly expanded, all kinds of new things that hadn't been written about in the first wine Bible. But I one day had this brilliant idea that I should rope in the very smart women around me, one of whom is sitting right here. I'm going to cry thinking, Lauren Marsh Banks, who was one of my research interns on the New Wine Bible. And I had at one point about 7 such incredibly intelligent women, all of whom were highly, highly knowledgeable about wine, all of whom were credentialed in wine, which I am not. And so they all took an area of research that they wanted to study and began to help me do the painstaking work of the research of the New Wine Bible. I did all of the writing, but I have to say that at one point, being fed all of this incredible information from these intelligent women was just, it was just amazing. My darling, you are the best. Thank you. Thank you. So I wanted to talk tonight about 3 ideas. Why wine matters, worthy of our consideration. The importance of wine and food as evolutionary pleasures, and the challenge of developing a sense of taste. And we will also take questions at the end, and we can get really practical then. But this is a little philosophic. So let me begin by saying that when I did the first wine Bible, I thought I had no expectation of sales. In fact, Peter Workman, the publisher of Workman Publishing, the owner of Workman Publishing, said to me at one point, I want you to know that the average wine book sells 10,000 copies. And I said, oh my God, oh no. I only have 50 friends, I think. I mean, I will never sell 10,000 copies. I couldn't even imagine that number. Well, that original wine Bible has now sold 750,000 copies. And I'm still stunned by that. And I will tell you that if you're one of the people who bought that original wine Bible, you will love the New Wine Bible because it's even, I don't know, 10 times better than the first book. But writing a book like this, a book that takes years of work, and unpaid work, by the way, brings with it a lot of solitude. And so it's really actually fun to be out and about. I feel like, whoa, I'm out instead of typing. But I do think, and I have often been asked when I am out, you know, how did you get into wine? This is a very common question. And the answer is that there is no getting into wine exactly. It's not like going to law school. It's not like any number of other professions. There is, in fact, no way to get there, to be paid to taste wine, although that's a pretty cool thing. But for everyone in the wine industry, we all know that it's always a convoluted and circuitous path. But I think that the really fascinating question anyway is not how I or anyone else got into the wine industry, but why we got into the wine industry. Because I'm from New York, but I've lived in Napa Valley now for 15 years. And, you know, we're not that far from Silicon Valley. And so it's really painfully obvious to all of us that you could make a lot more money had you decided to be in a different field. But it's also obvious that when you talk to people and you tell them what you do, not just me, but everyone in the wine industry, people who make a lot more money than you do would nonetheless trade places with you in a minute. And you think, what's that about, right? What is that about? After years of considering this, I've come to the conclusion that maybe it's this. Wine, I think, is one of the last true things in a world that is, I don't know, digitized to distraction, right? You can barely get out of your pajamas without your cell phone. In that world, wine still remains utterly simple, a through line of nature. Indeed, the silent music of the world, the silent music of nature. For 8,000 consecutive years, it's done the exact same thing. Berries get ripe, they're turned into wine. That wine, when we drink it, we don't put it up on a shelf, we take it into our bodies, usually in the presence of somebody else who's also drinking it. It ineluctably connects us to the earth. You don't even have to do anything. You just are connected. And I think wine matters because of that. Wine and food, it seems to me, sort of cradle us in our own humanity. They are the accessible pleasures that anthropologists believe were part of the evolutionary pleasures that sustained us in the early days when moving forward as a human being was a very difficult thing to do. The idea, though, that you could eat and drink in the presence of other people and share that was profoundly important. And as far away as we are now from those things, wine, the simple act of drinking, connects us back. So, as small as that might seem, and as casual as that might seem, wine, in fact, reminds us of all the things that matter: friendship, generosity, sharing, love. It's really a very profound entity. And a few words then also on taste. So as a wine writer, of course, I'm very interested in the intersection of taste and language. And that is a really muddily complex issue. And as we perhaps have all experienced, 10 people drinking the same wine come to radically different conclusions about it. So I'm just going to read you 3 quotes about wine. These 3 things were all said in a class of mine about the same wine. This wine smells like puppy's breath. It's like the musty aroma of old women sitting in wooden church pews. And the negligee character of this wine is mind-blowing. All said within minutes of each other about the same wine, which the wine in question was a Pinot Noir. So, that's why we love Pinot Noir, right? So what's going on there? Why is language, when it comes to wine, so hard to pin down? And why do so many of us just have that feeling so often that we know what we think when we taste a wine, but we just can't say it, right? There's never a problem when you give someone a glass of wine. In my opinion, there's never an issue about what they think. You can see, if you're a good teacher, you can see they know what they think. They just can't say what they think. And me too, right? It happens to all of us. So what is in fact going on there? The sensory identification and descriptions of wine have been studied in universities all over the world. And it's a very perplexing question because even linguists will point out that language describes other things and other relationships quite well. So if I say, there's a 8-inch square white plate in front of you, and on it is a 2-inch scoop of lemon sorbet, and around that are 8 1/2-inch cubes of pineapple. Even though you're never going to have that dessert, you can accurately picture it and imagine it. But if someone says, this wine is beautiful and elegant, we're left in the dust, right? Wine is a complete other story. Language really fails us in wine. And a few years ago, in thinking about this, because probably nobody, as you could hear from some of the excerpts that Patrick read, I can lay awake at night thinking these things through. But I a few years ago realized that, here's the main problem. Unlike food, its closest ally in life, right? Wine and food together. We know they've been married in a sense for 8,000 years. But unlike food, wine is not its own language, and food is. So in other words, if I say to you, here's a strawberry, what does it taste like? You say, it tastes like a strawberry. Great. It is a strawberry, it tastes like a strawberry, and we call that strawberry-ness. We're all agreed. But if someone says, here's a vernacha, what does it taste like? You say, it tastes like vernacha. It's unhelpful, right? Because wine is not its own inherent language. Chefs can talk very easily to one another because food is its own inherent language. A green pepper can only ever taste like a green pepper. But a Argentinian Malbec can taste like any number of things. And so the great ladder of wine knowledge is not only having a lot of tastes, but frankly, it's getting good at language. Once you become fluid in wine language, that's the relieving part. Not that it ever really gets easy, but the truth is that we are all, in fact, reduced to metaphor. And of course, there are great New Yorker cartoons about this petulant little wine, da-da-da-da-da, but I don't laugh at those things because I feel like, what else could we do, right? There is nothing else to do except to try and talk to one another by virtue of metaphor. The mind-blowing thing about this, though, for me, is that while I can certainly talk psalm talk, love to talk to those guys and can, do it day and night. But you don't have to talk that language. Any set of metaphors work. There's a famous architect in Northern California named Howard Bakken, and Howard and his wife were part of a group with Bill Harlan and several other couples, and I was their wine tutor for about 5 years. Not that Bill Harlan needs anyone to teach him about Cabernet, but Austrian Gruner Veltliner he could use some pointers on, I suppose, or at least then could. Anyway, after 2 years of this, once a month, Howard I just understood him to be a shy man. He never once offered an opinion. And much as I would try and sort of coax opinions out of everyone, he never contributed. So finally, after 2 years of this, I thought, you know what, I've got to be a safe teacher to him now. And I said, so Howard, here's this Cabernet. I really want you to do an analysis of this. He's in a safe room, right? A safe group of people. Anyway, he takes a sip of the wine, looks off in the distance for a moment, and says, this wine is like Chartres Cathedral. The colonnades, the air on the top, and proceeds in a whole paragraph to describe the wine architecturally. I thought, oh my God, he hasn't ever tasted a flavor. He doesn't care if it's cherries. He's seeing the wine. He's seeing it as architecture. And he then said something like, and by the way, this wine over here that you served is like a little pup tent. It's like. And I was just filled with this sense of happiness because I think that's completely right. It doesn't matter what metaphorical world you use. All that matters is that you use something, that you describe wine not for anyone else, but because the way the mind works, you have to describe it to yourself to remember it. And maybe the worst thing is to just, have 14,000 taste impressions over life and never remember the beauty of those. So it's metaphor that allows you to have your own internal loop, your own internal system of how to remember wine. Testing this out one day, I went to a big box retailer. I think it was probably Beverages and More. And anyway, I stood there in the aisle for a while. And eventually, a young man came up. And this is terrible. I shouldn't do this, but I can do this really well. I've just looked painfully unaware. And so this young man said, oh, ma'am, can I help you? And I just was fretting. I said, gee, I just don't know what to do. And he said, well, let me help you, and he went on. And I listened. And very carefully, he said, you could do X, you could do Y. Finally, I just said to him, well, I'm having a party, and I want a wine like Robin Williams. And he looked at me like, but he got a little twinkle in his eye and went off, and sure enough, brought back a couple of wines that I thought, yeah, this is right? So in that moment, again, I was confirmed in this idea that knowing about wine is to have your own sort of personal lexicon, your personal way of thinking about it. It doesn't matter how other people do it. What matters is that you know how you do it and that you're internally consistent. And when you do that, the world of wine opens up in an amazing way, because it is, after all, like so many other artistic fields, an art. So with those thoughts, those philosophic thoughts, I thought I would now answer some questions that can be utterly practical, how to wash glasses, or very philosophic, or anything else on your mind. Thoughts, sir?
How do you like to wash glasses?
I like to have my 13-year-old daughter wash the glasses, but
You trust them?
no, that's why you have to have more wine glasses than you were intending to have. The inside of a glass is not smooth. If you were to look at the inside of a good wine glass under a microscope, it looks like the surface of the moon, right? It's pitted, which is why if you have good glasses and you drink a lot of red wine, you'll notice after a while that the glass itself will start to turn tintedly purple. It's a sign of having a good glass, actually. So the worst thing you can do with wine glasses is something that used to be done like in Gourmet magazine in the 1960s, which is to have a dinner party and put an ice cream parfait in your wine glasses. Because dairy products have a lot of bacteria in them, and anything that gets into those little pits on the inside of a wine glass almost never gets out. So what matters most in wine glasses is that you just only ever use them for wine. They don't have to go necessarily in the dishwasher. They shouldn't be, and you don't want to use soap, as Patrick said, because soap evens out, right? It puts like an oil sludge on those little pits, and you want the inside of the moon on your wine glass. Among other things, it helps aerate the wine. So if you're ever only going to drink wine out of them anyway, you can just simply often rinse the glasses by hand. They don't have to be antiseptically washed. We know that from the Middle Ages, right? Yeah. Sir.
First, a testimonial. I teach a wine class at the University of Miami, and the introductory chapters to your other wine Bible, First Wine Bible, are probably the best thing that I have ever read, and I think my students have ever read, about how to make wine, how wine is made, how grapes are grown. And I'm really looking forward to the second wine Bible to see how that happens. My question is, I would guess a danger of being a person like you. And the only reason I say this is because I'm so envious that I am trying to figure out a way that I can live with myself not being you. And that is that you could get jaded. I mean, you taste so many wines, and not only so many wines, but so many really fantastic wines, that at a certain point, it's like it doesn't do it anymore. So how do you deal with that?
It never doesn't not do it anymore for me. I'm not sure why this is either, but for almost everyone, in fact, I think everyone I know in the wine business, one of the most interesting aspects of it is that you never fall out of love with it. You know people all the time who are, as we say, being bitten by the wine bug. But I don't know, I've never heard anyone say, you know what, I'm done. Wine, it was a passing fantasy. Gone now, I'm moving on. I mean, people might expand on to additional things like, oh, I'm also drinking some really cool bourbon or something. But nobody falls really out of love with it because, speaking for myself, I'm just genuinely, endlessly fascinated, not only by the flavor, and not only could I be drawn into any wine. I say this all the time and really mean it, that when I do events and there are wines there, I'm so happy that you all came, but if you didn't come, I'd sit here with these wines. I would. I'd be like, I'd sit there, take some notes. I'd be right, my head would be so right in there. And I don't know, as far as I'm concerned, it's the great gift given to all of us that we we have something this sustainable in our lives that is in fact endlessly fascinating, and that you can be fascinated by from all these different directions. I also, though, when I started learning about wine in the 1970s in New York, there was only one other woman in the entire wine business in New York who was not in public relations. And there was no way to learn about wine. There were no classes, none. There were no public tastings. There were certainly nothing as lovely as this, where you had books and wine together. So in those days, it was absolutely, completely difficult to learn about wine. And so I spent a lot of time reading. Well, what you read in those days were all the great British authors, and what was written about wine was straight out of the British school system in the 1950s. And wine was stripped out of culture, gastronomy, history, religion. I mean, it was very painfully dry. And I'll just say that not so long ago, I was in Argentina, and my editor happened to call me, and she said, "Where are you anyway?" I said, I'm in Argentina. "What are you doing?" I said, I'm researching. "Well, you're just, the like Argentinian wine, right?" And I said, "Well, right now I'm working on the history of the tango." And she said, "Remember, it's a wine book." I'm like, "You cannot understand Malbec until you get the history of the tango." And I genuinely believe that, right? So for me, there's always some way you could turn the kaleidoscope of wine that would be like, "Oh, wow, I never turned the kaleidoscope that way. That's pretty fascinating." So I can't ever imagine falling out of love. Other thoughts, comments?
I never was into Sauvignon Blancs until I realized I was drinking a Jamie Lee Curtis.
Oh, we're going to save that quote. I
wanted to ask you a question about California. We hadn't been in a long time and drove through the southern central part, and it was so dry. And I'm just wondering, living in Napa and Sonoma, what impact is it having on the quality of the wine, or doesn't it make? I know they're drip fed, but
Right.
is it having an impact?
So the comment was that because I live in Northern California, and because there's obviously a really bad drought there, is there a big impact on the vines? In the short term, it's not bad. In the short term, it's probably good, because grapes don't like a lot of water. They can be, dryness can help their concentration, although dryness and 100+ temperatures can be very negative, right? Because it can really raisinate those grapes. So in the short term, nobody is too terribly panicked. But now that this drought has gone on for almost 4 years, everyone is starting to get really edgy. Because the reservoirs are way down. The snowpack on the Sierras is way down. The good news is that it appears that it's going to be one of the most rain-drenched winters we've seen in a long time by virtue of El Nino. So we're all, and in fact, I will say that one day, maybe a few months ago, it actually did rain, and you have never seen more people so happily put up their umbrellas. It was like all of the Napa Valley was it was like singing in the rain or something. It was great. So I'm hoping, we're all hoping that this year will replenish. But I don't think wine quality per se has suffered yet. Sir?
Earth at all to maybe make regions creep up or something like that?
Definitely has. Southern Spain is very worried. Germany is ecstatic. Canada is ecstatic. All the northern countries have made some of the most beautifully rich, complex wines they've ever made in the last 10 years.
Because they have a longer period of warmth?
Because they have a longer period of warmth. But remember that global warming is not necessarily, well, I suppose it is global warming, but for wine regions, it's really maybe more accurately described as climate change. Because of the last 4 years, Napa Valley has had two of its coldest years in the last 4 years. So what is crazy is the unpredictability of the climate, not necessarily that for every region it is de facto hotter. Those regions, and in California, as you know, you imagine the coast of California, right, going from Los Angeles to San Francisco. What matters is not latitude, as it does in France, right? South of France, different than northern France. What matters in California is proximity to the ocean. The closer you are to the Pacific, the cooler you are. The farther inland, the warmer you are, regardless of whether you're next to Los Angeles or next to San Francisco. So for areas that have water as a big dominant factor, in some of these areas, things are getting colder, not warmer. Yeah, it's a really complex issue, to be sure. More thoughts? Madam, back here.
Is there a wine that, since you taste so many wines, is there, and I'm in the industry, and I think it gets harder the more you taste to have a favorite wine? Is it something like that you, is it about food? Is it about a memory? Or is there a go-to wine that you always, are you a red girl or you're a white girl? Or
yeah. Oh, I am a white girl, but I just had to say that. Get it. I am a red girl as well. Thank you, thank you. You know, I do have a glass of sparkling wine or champagne every night of my life, and have for 20 years. I consider it indispensable to motherhood, the source of all patience, man. And the only way you can say in your own business, in your own small business, yes. Lauren will know that I've personally consumed, and really I'm got to be one of the leading consumers of Roederer Estate, which is the best California sparkler. But beyond that, in fact, I'm always surprised that more people don't do that, right? It's 5 o'clock. It's hello? God has said this is the time for this. Like, what are we doing? And it doesn't mean that we've stopped working. I mean, Jacqueline, my assistant, she's 25, and I think her first week of work when it was 5 o'clock, and she just saw me, fiddling over there in the kitchen. I'm like, well, it's 5 o'clock. Here's a glass of Schramsberg. I think she thought, oh, I think I made a good bet with this job. But anyway, but then after that, it a little bit depends on the climate. For example, I was here in Florida last night, and I was in West Palm Beach, and I went to an Italian restaurant, and I thought, I don't care how much great Barolo they have, bring me cold Italian Vernaccia. And I said to the captain, he's like, right away, ma'am, So some of it has to do with just how your body feels, I think. But mostly I'm having to taste so many wines that I can't necessarily have one favorite. The other thing, though, I think is this, that is maybe the more important point, is many wines are rites of passage. They are not knowable the first few times you taste them. So sometimes I say to my students, when my students would say, I really don't like this wine, I'll be like, okay, so here are the possibilities. You're not tasting it right. number one. That could be one possibility. Possibility number two, it's not good. It's just not a good wine. Possibility three, you haven't tasted enough of this yet, right? Because think about raw oysters, sushi, any number of things that the first few times you had it, you really weren't in a position to make a good judgment of it, right? It was a bit of a rite of passage. You had to know, you had to hit the baseball more times than that. And sometimes our distrust of a thing is in perfect inverse proportion to our ultimate love of it. So you were the person who, you were like, sushi? I don't think so. But then you become the person who really loves sushi, right? That happens with wine all the time. People say, you know, I don't know, Uruguayan Tanat. I taste one, I don't like it. Well, sorry, you got to taste 100 more, and then you can tell me you don't like it. But until that point, you haven't, and I hold myself to that same standard. So sometimes what I'm tasting are things that I ostensibly say to myself, I'm not sure I like this. But then I want to sit there with it a while and several times and see if maybe the light switch just hasn't gone on yet for me. And often it does. Usually I can find something really lovable. So, all right, who else? I saw more hands back here. Lauren?
So, follow up to that.
Oh gosh, you're asking me a question. Oh my
If
God.
you had to describe yourself as a wine, what would it be?
Oh. Ooh. Yeah, because she's one of my girls, though, I can say I'm not answering that, though. That's true, too. No, Jamie Lee Curtis. I would say, what would I say? I would probably say I don't have enough corruptness to be Pinot Noir. I would say probably Riesling, because I'm very precise like Riesling. I'm very energetic like Riesling. Yeah, I can occasionally be, I don't know, very, yeah. Yeah, don't go the tart direction. No, I was worried about that. As I was playing the chess moves out in my head, and I thought, oh, maybe don't. Take back Riesling. But I do really love, speaking of Riesling, I do love the purity of Riesling. And I think Riesling has a lesson for all of us about sheerness. It's the ultimate silk stockings of wine, right? There is no other grape that is as sheer and pure and revealing and full of energy as Riesling. So, I don't know, maybe Riesling. Oh.
Americans are just discovering the Trocken and their Trocken Rieslings that, for so much time, everybody thinks of the Lied from Milchens and the Cabinets, and so, and to share what Germans have been drinking for a long time, these very dry
Yes.
Rieslings in America, hasn't quite discovered these, and to share them with people who are now kind of emerging into the Sauvignon Blancs and dry crisp wines and introducing to these Trockens. Their Trockens are
So true, Tom. That's right. And most of the German wine that comes into the United States today is in fact dry German Riesling, unless it's meant as a sweet wine, in which case you would know it because it's meant as a dessert wine. But a large percentage of the wine that comes in is either technically dry or by virtue of its soaring acidity is palate dry, right? It finishes clean. It's meant as dinner wine. It's not meant as dessert wine. What else? Sir?
Since you started writing, you've seen, I think, enormous changes in sort of how people view and what types of wines they like here and elsewhere in the world, Europe, et cetera, et cetera. So if you were to predict 15 years down the line, what are you going to see? What are we going to see? what changes do you think will occur both in what we drink and what's produced and what we drink and what we want?
Yeah. What changes will we see in what we drink and what we want and desire? It's hard to believe that even 20 years ago there were huge campaigns launched that for people that encouraged people to drink, Sangiovese and Tempranillo, Chianti and Rioja, because people 20 years ago drank unbelievably narrowly. One of the best things that has happened in the wine industry in the last 20 years is this huge expansion, largely driven by millennials who are like, I just want it to be good. I want it to have personality. I don't have a necessary allegiance to Cabernet Merlot or anything else, so I love those varieties too. So this whole idea of this broad acceptance of multiple grape varieties is, to me, a massive shift that will continue. There are at least 5,000 grape varieties in the world, depending on if you count what is what exists in laboratories as well that isn't in commercial production. That number probably could go up to 7,500, but there are a good 5,000 planted varieties in the world. The idea that in America, on any given night, you is only choosing from 4 of them, either Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Noir, or Cabernet, is the equivalent of eating chicken and carrots at all meals all the time. It's unthinkable in food, right? You would never do it. Like, where are the mangoes? Where are the sweet peas? Where's the ginger? You wouldn't. It's unthinkable in food. And it's starting to be, I think, unthinkable in wine. It's so fabulous to go to restaurants now all over the country and read a wine list and you think, man, wow, Russian Saperavi, who knew, right? I don't know, way out there. And young sommeliers, of course, love being way out there, but not necessarily at the expense of the classics. So I love that. I feel like our whole world of flavor is the doors are just really opening. And I think that's the biggest shift in the culture of wine in America. Yep. Doug.
Just to talk about at the beginning, you talked about all the new regions that you're writing about in the second book. I was going to say what's the most fascinating, but what was the most surprising new region that you dove into?
Without a doubt, the most surprising region was the one that I wrote about last, and it doesn't even, we just was able to get it into the book, which, because I was only there in June, which is, so imagine this, you land in Singapore, right? You get on another plane, and you take a plane for 3 hours straight west to the edge of the Gobi Desert, in the center of China, where caravan routes, this is the old Silk Road to the west. And the Gobi Desert is this huge, it's called a moving desert. It's shifting, it's getting bigger by the moment. And so I get out of the plane, you get into a van, I'm put in a van, and drive now 2 hours more out into the wine regions. They are building the roads as you drive to the winery. They're building the road to the winery as you're driving up. And thousands of men are building these roads, not a few guys. And for as far as the eye can see, maybe 10,000 Muslim women in pink hijab headscarves, all pink headscarves, are kneeling on the ground, planting trees and bushes and vegetation to hold this desert in place so that they can plant grapevines. Your jaw drops. You think, oh my God, this is like completely reclaiming a whole place, turning a desert into a wine region with unlimited people, unlimited money, and no governmental barriers. So I met with the head of the Communist Party, whose idea this was. And I'm thinking, I'm somewhat suspect. We sit, as is common in a Chinese diplomatic situation where you don't actually look at the person, you sit out facing this square room full or rectangular room full of deputies. And he speaks out to the floor and you speak out to the floor. And I kept wanting to turn to him, but it's too confrontational, right? You can't. So he begins to tell me how the only vines in Ningxia, the so-called Napa Valley of China, the oldest vines are 5 years old, but they've already set up a classification system built on the 1855 classification system. And there are no first growths yet. There are right now maybe 30,000 acres of vines in the last 5 years. But in the next 5 years, this region will have 5 times as many vines as the Napa Valley. 5 times as many. You taste the wine and you think, okay, 5 years old, 5-year-old vines, what can this be? The wines are unbelievably good. I was blown away. And none of us probably have ever hit 100. We haven't hit 100 balls in terms of the baseball bat when it comes to Chinese wine. But in the same way that we all know French wine, a generation from now, people will know Chinese wine very, very commonly, very intimately. They're the 5th leading producer, never mind the 5th leading consumer, already. And it's astounding. I mean, it's mostly Cabernet. They also grow Chardonnay, but the Chardonnay, in China, there's not a big appreciation for acidity. They really much prefer bitterness over acidity. So the Chardonnays are a little, to me, wobbly. They're not tight and sleek, but the Cabernets are remarkably good.
Was there good variation between the different Cabernets?
Yes, I mean there are no maps. You can't ask them anything about terroir. There's no soil studies. They're just coming in, building the roads, putting in the Muslim women and the trees, and it is astounding. And when you say, I mean, you're trying to figure out regions, there's no differentiation between. There are no actual appellations yet, but it's all on the edges of what is called Helan Mountain. But they'll be very quick on this. They get that that's where it's going, and that's where they need to go. So 2 more years, they'll have it all mapped out.
Do they have to bury the wine?
Yes, it is so freezing cold that by hand they dig trenches beside the vines, and by hand after the harvest, they bend every cane over, bury the whole vine up to this height, and then very painstakingly in the spring unbury every vine. Patrick?
Why do you think that these Chinese, because you've tasted them, I've not read about them. You're the first person who's said they are good. Why do you think that is? Is it because of the quality of the fruit stock they're putting there, or is it just that you were so surprised that maybe something?
No, I think it's actually maybe naive of us all to imagine that that all the great wine regions are known. I'm guilty of that. I think, all right, I know Bordeaux, I know Tuscany, I know Piedmont, I know Napa, I know Rioja, I know all the great wine regions. But what if the greatest wine regions are yet to be known, right? There are places being planted right now in the Himalayas in Sichuan province at 10,000 feet that I hear, I haven't been there, but I hear are mind-blowing, the wines. I mean, we know Europe and we know the Americas, but Asia could be a big open book. I think it is a big open book. Lots of it is not suited, right, because it's too humid. But parts of it are not humid at all. Northern India, southwestern China could be phenomenal. All right, well, all of you need to sign some books. You've been so kind to listen and ask questions. I'm really, once again, so thankful to be with you tonight, and thank you for being wine lovers. Thank you for continuing to help make the culture of wine in America so rich. I wish you many great bottles in the future and a lot of good reading in the future. All right.
All right, folks, so if there are no more questions, then a reminder for our internet audience watching at home, you can still call the number on your screen and we will ship the Wine Bible to wherever you are in the U.S. free of charge. For those of you here in the house, we have the book for sale at the counter in the front room over there. Karen's going to be signing here at the table to the left of the podium. If you enjoyed your wine sample, we have all of those for sale outside at the bar. I want to thank our good friend Patrick Alexander for that wonderful introduction, and please give, yes, and please give another big hand to Ms. Karen MacNeil. Thank you very much. Thank you, Karen.